I never thought I'd be one of those mothers struggling on the subway during rush hour, but there I was, surrounded by strangers who couldn't hide their stares and judgment. My arms ached from holding 2 grocery bags while trying to keep Owen from melting down completely. He was 3 and exhausted, his face red and wet with tears as he wailed about wanting to go home. Lily, my 5-year-old, kept tugging at my jacket, asking the same question over and over. Mommy, why can't we just drive? My feet hurt. I didn't have a good answer for her. How do you explain to a kindergartner that the car her grandfather bought specifically for her safety was sitting in someone else's driveway? How do you tell your children that their own father decided you didn't deserve it? The subway lurched and I nearly lost my balance. A woman beside me caught one of my grocery bags before it hit the floor, giving me a sympathetic smile that somehow made me feel worse. I mumbled a thank you and tried to soothe Owen by bouncing him slightly, but my arms were shaking from the weight of everything, the bags, my son, the crushing exhaustion that had become my constant companion these past 3 weeks. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. 2 years ago, when my dad gave me that beautiful silver SUV, he'd looked me straight in the eye and said, "This is for you and my grandbabies. I don't want you worrying about breaking down on some highway with those kids in the car." He'd worked so hard to build his construction business from nothing, and when he finally had the money to help me, he did it without hesitation. That car represented more than transportation. It was his way of making sure we were safe. Now it was gone, and I felt like I'd somehow failed him by letting it happen. "Mommy, that man is looking at us," Lily whispered, pressing closer to my leg. I glanced up, ready to give whoever it was a tired smile to acknowledge the disturbance we were causing. And my heart stopped. "Jessica," it was my dad's voice cutting through the noise of the moving train, the crying, the general chaos of evening commuters trying to get home. I looked up and there he was, Robert Monroe, still in his work boots and dusty jeans from whatever construction site he'd been overseeing that day. His face showed complete confusion as he took in the scene before him. "Dad," my voice came out smaller than I intended. He moved through the crowded car with the confidence of someone who'd spent his life navigating difficult situations. When he reached us, his eyes swept over everything. The grocery bags, Owen's tear-stained face, Lily clinging to my leg. The exhaustion I knew was written all over my face. "Why aren't you using the car I gave you?" It wasn't an accusation. He genuinely didn't understand. In his mind, there was a perfectly good vehicle sitting somewhere, ready to prevent exactly this situation. The question was so simple, so logical that it somehow broke through every defense I'd built up over the past 3 weeks. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. "Trevor and his sisters took it," I whispered, not wanting Lily to hear the tremor in my voice. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to something else, something sharp and focused. He bent down and scooped Owen up without asking, and my son immediately stopped crying, resting his head on his grandfather's shoulder. The relief in my arms was instant, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. "What do you mean, took it?" Dad's voice was calm, but I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when a contractor tried to cheat him or when someone on a job site did something dangerous. It was the voice that preceded action. I couldn't explain it here. Not surrounded by strangers, not with Lily listening to every word. I just shook my head, and more tears spilled over. "Don't worry," Dad said. And there was something in those 2 words that made me believe him. He shifted Owen to one arm and took both grocery bags with the other like they weighed nothing. "What's your stop?" "Belmont Avenue." "But Dad, I were getting off at Belmont." Then the next few minutes passed in a blur. Lily held my hand and kept looking up at her grandfather carrying her baby brother, probably wondering why we'd never called him before, if he could make everything feel safer so quickly. When we emerged from the underground station into the evening air, Dad led us to his pickup truck parked nearby. "Were you coming from a job site?" I asked, trying to make normal conversation, trying to pretend this was a pleasant surprise and not a complete disaster. "Meeting with a developer about a new project," he said, opening the back door of his extended cab and securing Owen into the booster seat he kept there for exactly these situations. He'd always been prepared for his grandchildren, always thinking ahead. Lucky thing I took the subway instead of driving. But as he helped Lily into her seat, I saw his jaw was tight. This wasn't luck to him. This was something else entirely. Once the kids were settled, he turned to me. "Get in. We need to talk." I climbed into the passenger seat, and the familiar smell of sawdust and coffee surrounded me. How many times had I ridden in this truck growing up? How many times had Dad picked me up from school, from failed dates, from mistakes I'd made? And here I was again, needing him to rescue me. Except this time, I'd brought 2 innocent kids into my mess. He didn't start the engine. Instead, he turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. How long has this been going on, Jessica? 3 weeks, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It started small. Amber said she needed to impress some clients, and her car wasn't nice enough. Trevor agreed to lend her mine before I could even say anything. Then it was supposed to be just one day, then a weekend. Then Nicole said her car was in the shop and needed it, too. And suddenly, it's been 3 weeks, and you've been hauling my grandchildren on buses and subways with groceries. It wasn't a question. I tried to say no. The words tumbled out now, desperate and ashamed. I told Trevor I needed it, that the kids had doctor appointments and grocery shopping and Lily's ballet classes, but he said I was being selfish. He said family helps family. And then when I really put my foot down last week when I demanded the keys back, I trailed off, remembering that night in my kitchen. Trevor's face had been so different from the man I'd married, and Amber and Nicole standing behind him like some kind of backup force, their faces smug and satisfied. When you demanded the keys back, what happened? Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. They were all there. Trevor and both his sisters. They cornered me and they said if I didn't stop being difficult, I'd see what life was like without his support. Amber called me ungrateful. Nicole said, just because you had money didn't mean I was raised with any class, and Trevor just stood there agreeing with them. I was crying fully now. Ugly tears that I'd been holding back for weeks. I was scared, Dad. Not physically, but the way they all looked at me, the things they said. I felt so small. So, I've just been managing, taking the subway, the bus, whatever I needed to do. I told everyone the car was having problems. I didn't want anyone to know what really happened because it felt like admitting I'd completely failed it. Dad held up his hand and I stopped talking. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. Tom, it's Rob Monroe. I need you to find out everything you can about Trevor Hayes and his sisters, Amber and Nicole Hayes. Everything. Financial records, legal issues, whatever you can dig up. I'll pay whatever it takes. And I need it fast. He hung up and finally looked at me again. You didn't fail at anything, sweetheart. But this ends now. Everything had seemed so normal that Sunday afternoon 3 weeks ago. Trevor had insisted we go to his parents' house for dinner, even though I'd mentioned wanting to have a quiet weekend at home with the kids. But he'd been insistent, saying his mom really wanted to see the children. And I'd learned that disagreeing about family visits usually wasn't worth the argument that followed. The Hayes family home was exactly what you'd expect from people who valued appearance above almost everything else. Perfectly landscaped lawn, furniture that looked expensive but wasn't comfortable, and family photos arranged just so on every available surface. Trevor's mother, Patricia, had greeted us at the door with her usual air kisses that didn't actually touch my cheeks, while his father, Donald, barely looked up from his newspaper. Amber had arrived 20 minutes after us, making her entrance like always, complaining loudly about a client who just didn't understand the value of premium real estate. She worked as a real estate agent, though from what I could tell, she spent more time taking selfies in expensive houses than actually selling them. Oh, Jessica, I love that sweater, she'd said when she saw me in that tone that somehow made a compliment sound like an insult. So brave of you to wear something so casual to family dinner. I'd been wearing a nice cream cardigan over a dress, but somehow Amber made me feel like I'd shown up in pajamas. Nicole arrived last as usual. Her dental hygienist scrubs traded for designer jeans and a top that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She and Amber immediately huddled together, whispering and giggling about something on Nicole's phone, occasionally glancing at me in a way that made my skin crawl. Dinner had been fine. Patricia's pot roast, polite conversation about Trevor's work, the kids being relatively well behaved. I'd started to relax, thinking maybe I'd worried about nothing. Then came dessert. So, Amber said, setting down her fork and fixing me with that calculated smile she wore when she wanted something. I have this amazing opportunity coming up. Really high-end clients looking at properties in the $1 million range. They're flying in from California, and first impressions are everything in this business. That sounds exciting, I'd said, genuinely trying to be supportive. The thing is, she continued, leaning forward like she was sharing a secret. My car is just, well, it's fine for every day, but it doesn't exactly scream success. You know, I need something that looks the part. I felt Trevor shift beside me, and somehow I knew where this was going before Amber even finished her sentence. That SUV of yours would be perfect, she said, her tone light and casual, like she was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. Just for a few days while I show these clients around. You understand how important image is, right? Every eye at the table turned to me. Patricia smiled encouragingly. Donald nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. Nicole watched with barely concealed amusement. Oh, well, I started, but Trevor cut me off. Of course she can use it, he said, his hand finding mine under the table and squeezing just a little too hard. Family helps family, right, Jess? It wasn't really a question. The kids have appointments this week and I need to do grocery shopping and Lily has ballet on Thursday. You can take my car, Nicole offered quickly. Too quickly. I'll just Uber to work for a few days. No big deal. Except Nicole's car was a tiny two-door coupe that didn't even have proper back seats, let alone space for 2 car seats and groceries. But everyone was looking at me like I was being difficult, like I was the unreasonable one for hesitating to hand over the vehicle my father had bought specifically for my children's safety. That's so generous of you, Nicole, Patricia said warmly, then turned to me with expectation written all over her face. Isn't that generous, Jessica? I felt trapped, cornered by politeness and family expectations, and Trevor's hand still gripping mine under the table. Sure, I heard myself say. Of course, family helps family. Amber's smile turned triumphant. You're the best, Jess. I'll take great care of it. I promise. That had been 3 weeks ago, and a few days had stretched like taffy being pulled. First, Amber needed it through the weekend because the clients wanted to see more properties. Then, she needed it for another week because she had more showings lined up. Then, suddenly, Nicole's car actually was in the shop, or so she claimed, and she needed to borrow it, too. Every time I asked Trevor when I'd get my car back, he'd get defensive. Why are you being so selfish about this? He'd snapped one evening while I was making dinner. My sister is trying to make a big sale that could really help her career, and you're worried about driving to the grocery store. It's not just the grocery store, I protested quietly, stirring the pasta sauce and not looking at him. It's the kids' activities, their appointments. Your father bought that car specifically because your father, he'd corrected sharply. Your father bought it. Yes. And he thinks that means he can control everything, doesn't he? Well, you're part of the Hayes family now, Jessica. That means what's yours is ours. That logic had made my head spin. But I'd learned that arguing with Trevor when he was in that mood only made things worse. So, I'd adjusted. I'd figured out bus routes and subway schedules. I'd learned which grocery stores were closest to which stations. I'd carried Owen when he got too tired to walk and held Lily's hand through crowded platforms and pretended everything was fine until last Wednesday when I'd finally broken. Amber had posted photos on social media, her and Nicole in my car at some wine bar downtown with the caption, "Sisters who slay together stay together," not showing properties, not with clients, just out having fun in the vehicle they'd guilt me into lending them. I'd shown the photos to Trevor that night after the kids were in bed. I need the car back, I'd said, trying to keep my voice steady. This was supposed to be for a few days for work, and they're just using it to go out. I need it back, Trevor. His face had darkened immediately. Are you serious right now? You're going to make a big deal about this? It's been 3 weeks. I've been taking 2 small children on public transportation in the heat, carrying groceries, and your sisters are using my car to go drinking downtown. Yes, I'm serious. I hadn't meant to raise my voice, but the frustration had finally boiled over, and that's when everything changed. Trevor had pulled out his phone and made a call. Hey, Amber. Yeah. Can you and Nicole come over? We need to have a family discussion. They'd arrived within 30 minutes, like they'd been waiting for the call. And suddenly, I was facing all 3 of them in my own kitchen. Trevor standing with his arms crossed, Amber leaning against the counter with that superior smirk. Nicole examining her nails like this was boring but necessary. So Jessica has decided to be difficult about the car situation, Trevor announced like I wasn't even there. Really? Amber's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. After everything we've done for her, what have you done for me? The question escaped before I could stop it. The temperature in the room dropped 10. Nicole stopped examining her nails and looked at me like I just said something obscene. Amber's smirk vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp. Trevor's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. What have we done for you? Amber repeated slowly, pushing off from the counter and taking a step toward me. Are you actually asking that question right now? We welcomed you into this family, Nicole added, her voice dripping with full sweetness. Even though you came from nothing. I didn't come from nothing, I said quietly, but my voice was shaking. My dad worked hard for everything he has. Oh, your dad. Amber laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yes, let's talk about your dad. New money. Construction worker who got lucky. Just because he has money now doesn't mean you are aced with any class. Jessica, we all see how uncomfortable you are at family events. How you don't know which fork to use. How you that's enough. I interrupted, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. This isn't about class or forks or whatever superiority you think you have. This is about my car that you've been using for 3 weeks when you said you needed it for a few days. Trevor moved closer and I instinctively took a step back. I'd never been physically afraid of him before, but something in his eyes that night was different, harder, like he was looking at an obstacle instead of his wife. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You're going to stop making problems. You're going to stop being selfish and ungrateful because if you don't, you're going to see what life looks like without my support." "What does that mean?" I whispered. "It means," Nicole chimed in, examining her nails again like this conversation was beneath her, "that you might want to think about who pays the mortgage on this house, who has the career with benefits, who has the family connections that matter." My mind raced. Yes, Trevor's name was on the mortgage, but I'd put down half the down payment from my savings. Yes, he had benefits through his job, but I worked, too. I was a teacher, and that mattered. And family connections. What did that even mean? "Are you threatening me?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "Nobody's threatening anyone," Amber said smoothly, but her smile was all teeth. "We're just helping you understand reality. You're part of this family now, which means what's yours is ours. That car, it might have been a gift from your daddy, but you're a Hayes now. Hayes family shares everything." "That's not how gifts work," I said weakly. "It's how family works," Trevor shot back. "Unless you don't want to be part of this family anymore." "Is that what you're saying, Jessica? Because I can make that happen." The threat hung in the air like smoke. I looked at each of them, my husband and his sisters forming a united front against me in my own kitchen. And something inside me cracked. Not broke. Not yet, but cracked. A hairline fracture that would only get worse with pressure. I'd handed over the keys without another word. That had been a week ago, and I'd been drowning ever since. The shame of it was almost worse than the inconvenience. I'd stopped answering my dad's calls because I knew he'd hear something wrong in my voice. I'd made excuses to my friends about why I couldn't meet up, why I was always rushing, why I looked so tired. I told everyone the car was having mechanical problems, that it was in the shop, that I was managing fine. But I wasn't fine. I was breaking apart piece by piece. And the worst part was that I'd let it happen. I'd handed over those keys because I was scared, not of physical violence, but of something harder to define. The threat of being cut off, isolated, labeled as the problem when I was just trying to protect what was mine. Now, sitting in my father's truck with Owen and Lily buckled safely in the back, watching Dad's face as he processed everything I'd told him, I felt that crack inside me widen just a little more. "Don't go home tonight," Dad said after a long moment of silence. His voice was calm, but I could see his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to make his knuckles white. "Pack bags for you and the kids. Stay at my house, Dad. I can't just—" "Yes, you can." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were fierce. "Jessica, listen to me very carefully. What you just described isn't a family disagreement. That's intimidation. That's financial abuse. And I'm not going to let it continue for one more day." "But Trevor will what? Come to my house and demand you come back." "I'd love to see him try." Dad started the engine. "I'm taking you home right now. You're going to pack whatever you and the kids need for a few days. I'll wait outside. Then you're coming to my place while I figure out exactly what we're dealing with." "What do you mean figure out what we're dealing with?" He glanced at me and there was something in his expression. I'd rarely seen the same look he got when someone tried to cheat him on a contract or when a safety violation put his workers at risk. It was the look of a man who'd built something from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone take advantage of his family. That phone call I made, that was to Riley. He's a private investigator I've used for business dealings. Good at finding information people don't want found. Dad pulled into traffic heading toward my neighborhood. "If Trevor and his sisters felt comfortable cornering you in your own home and threatening you over a car, this isn't about the car, Jessica. There's something else going on. Money problems, maybe something that made them desperate enough to bully you. You think Trevor's in financial trouble. I think a man who has to threaten his wife and recruit his sisters to back him up is a man who's hiding something." Dad's voice was grim, "and I'm going to find out what it is." We drove in silence for a few minutes. In the back seat, Lily was singing softly to Owen some song from her kindergarten class. They had no idea what was happening, no idea their world was about to shift. Part of me wanted to tell Dad to forget it, to just take me home so I could pretend everything was normal. But another part, the part that was tired of being small and scared and constantly apologizing for taking up space, knew he was right. "What if I'm overreacting?" I asked quietly. "What if this is just normal family stuff and I'm being too sensitive like Trevor always says?" Dad reached over and took my hand. "Sweetheart, normal families don't threaten each other. Normal husbands don't corner their wives with backup. And normal people don't make you feel crazy for wanting to keep what's yours. He squeezed my hand gently. Trust me on this. Something's very wrong, and we're going to find out what it is. As we pulled up to my house, I saw Trevor's car in the driveway, my stomach clenched with anxiety. But then I felt Dad's steady presence beside me and remembered I wasn't alone anymore. I'd been seen, finally. Someone had seen what was happening and believed me without question. 10 minutes, Dad said. Pack fast. I'll be right here. I nodded and got out of the truck, my heart pounding as I headed toward the front door. I'd barely gotten through the door with the kids when Trevor appeared from the living room, his face already twisted with suspicion. Where have you been? I've been calling you for an hour. His eyes swept over me, then landed on the children. Why didn't you answer your phone? We ran into my dad on the subway, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. He gave us a ride home. Trevor's expression shifted from suspicion to something darker. Your dad just happened to be on the subway. Yes, Trevor. People take the subway, even people who own construction companies. I moved past him toward the stairs, holding Lily's hand while Owen toddled beside me. I need to get the kids cleaned up for bed. It's only 7:30. They're tired. We had a long day. I kept walking, feeling his eyes boring into my back. We need to talk, he called after me. After I get them settled. I heard him mutter something under his breath, but I didn't stop. In the kids' room, I pulled out their small suitcases from the closet. The ones we used for weekend trips to visit my dad. My hands shook as I started throwing in clothes, trying to remember what they'd need. Pajamas, clothes for a few days, their favorite stuffed animals, toothbrushes. Mommy, are we going to Grandpa's house? Lily asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Yes, baby, just for a little visit. Can we see his truck? The big one with the crane. Maybe. We'll see. I kissed the top of her head and kept packing, my heart racing. I could hear Trevor moving around downstairs, his footsteps heavier than usual. Angry footsteps. Once the kids' bags were packed, I went to my bedroom and grabbed my own suitcase, clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important documents. I grabbed my passport, birth certificates for the kids, our social security cards. Something told me to take anything I might need if I couldn't come back easily. That's when I saw it. Trevor's jacket was thrown over the chair by his dresser, and a piece of paper was sticking out of the pocket. I don't know what made me look. Maybe intuition, maybe just the way it caught the light. But I pulled it out and felt my blood turn to ice. It was a bill of sale, a draft printed from someone's computer with blank spaces for signatures. But the vehicle information was already filled in. My SUV's make, model, year, and VIN number. The selling price, $18,000. My father had paid $32,000 for that car 2 years ago. I stood there staring at the paper and suddenly everything clicked into place. This wasn't about Amber needing to impress clients. This wasn't about Nicole's car being in the shop. This was about Trevor planning to sell my car. The car that wasn't even in his name without telling me. Jessica. Trevor's voice came from downstairs, sharp and impatient. Are you coming down or what? I folded the paper and shoved it in my pocket, then grabbed my suitcase and headed downstairs. Trevor was standing by the front door blocking it, his arms crossed over his chest. Where do you think you're going with those bags? The kids and I are staying at my dad's for a few days. Like hell you are. He moved closer and I instinctively stepped back. You're not taking my children anywhere. They're my children, too, Trevor. And we're just visiting my dad. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal when you're acting crazy and irrational. His voice rose. First you make a scene about the car. Now you're running to daddy like a child. When are you going to grow up, Jessica? I felt the paper in my pocket like it was burning. I found the bill of sale. The color drained from his face just for a second before the anger rushed back in. You went through my things. It was sticking out of your pocket. You were planning to sell my car. My car? Trevor. The one my father bought for me and the kids. The one that's in my name, not yours. We're married. What's yours is mine. You said so yourself. Family shares everything. He was using Amber's words, her logic, and it made me feel sick. That's not how it works. That car is titled solely in my name. Selling it without my permission is theft. Trevor laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. You're going to call me a thief after everything I've done for you after I gave you this house, this life. I helped pay for this house. I work too, Trevor. I contribute. You're a teacher. You make what? $35,000 a year. That's barely enough to cover groceries, he sneered, and I saw his sisters in that expression. Without me, you'd be living in some apartment somewhere, struggling to make rent. Behind me, I heard Lily start to cry softly. She'd come to the top of the stairs and was watching us fight. Owen was beside her, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes wide and scared. Stop it, I said quietly, gesturing to the kids. Just stop. I'll stop when you put those bags away and start acting like a wife instead of a spoiled brat who runs to daddy every time things don't go her way. There was a knock at the door. Hard, authoritative. Trevor and I both froze. That's my dad, I said. He's waiting for us. Tell him to leave. No. The knock came again, louder this time. Trevor's face went red. If you walk out that door with those kids, don't bother coming back. You hear me? You want to choose your daddy over your husband, fine. But don't expect me to be here when you decide to come crawling back. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered when he'd become this person. Or had he always been this way, and I'd just been too desperate to be loved to notice. I'm not choosing between anyone, I said quietly. I'm choosing to not be threatened in my own home. I'm choosing to not have my things stolen. I'm choosing to protect my children from watching their father bully their mother. I walked past him to the stairs and scooped up Owen, taking Lily's hand. Trevor didn't try to stop me physically, but his voice followed us as I grabbed our bags. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Jessica. The biggest mistake. I opened the door, and there was my dad, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp and assessing. He took Owen from my arms and picked up the bags without a word. Hi, Grandpa, Lily said, her voice still shaky from crying. Hi, sweetheart. Ready for a sleepover at my house, she nodded, wiping her eyes. I didn't look back at Trevor as we walked to the truck. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might lose my nerve. I might remember all the good times, all the reasons I'd fallen in love with him, all the promises he'd made about the life we'd built together. But those promises had been built on sand, and now the tide was coming in. Dad secured the kids in their car seats, then turned to me. You okay? I pulled out the bill of sale and handed it to him. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. He was going to sell it, I whispered, for $18,000. Half what you paid for it. Dad folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. Get in the truck, sweetheart. What are you going to do? He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that was both comforting and terrifying. The absolute certainty of a man who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. I'm going to end this tomorrow morning. But tonight, you and the kids are safe. That's all that matters right now. As we drove away, I watched my house disappear in the side mirror and wondered if I'd ever feel safe there again. I barely slept that night. Dad had set us up in the guest room, the one he decorated years ago, hoping we'd visit more often with a double bed for me and a trundle that pulled out for the kids. Lily and Owen had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted from the emotional day, but I'd laid awake staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Around 6:00 in the morning, I heard Dad moving around downstairs. The smell of coffee drifted up, and I finally gave up on sleep and went to find him. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop, several printed documents spread out in front of him, his phone beside his coffee mug. He looked up when I entered and gestured to the coffee pot. Tom worked fast, he said without preamble. You're going to want to sit down for this. I poured myself a cup and sat across from him, my stomach churning with anxiety. Dad slid a document across the table. Trevor's been gambling, online poker, sports betting. He's lost over $80,000 in the past 18 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. 80,000? How is that even possible? Credit cards, a loan he took out without telling you. And Dad paused, his expression grim. He's been draining your joint savings account little by little so you wouldn't notice. I thought about all the times Trevor had insisted on handling the finances, saying I had enough to worry about with work and the kids. How he'd gotten annoyed when I asked to see bank statements. How he always changed the subject when I mentioned saving for the kids' college funds. There's more. Dad pulled out another document. Printouts of text messages. Tom has a contact at Amber's real estate agency. She's been involved in some questionable dealings, inflating appraisal values, hiding property defects from buyers. Her broker's been investigating her, and she could lose her license. And Nicole fired from her last dental office for insurance fraud. She was billing for procedures that were never performed. The office didn't press charges because she agreed to leave quietly, but it's documented. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, the financial records, the text messages, the background reports. My husband and his sisters weren't just bullies. They were desperate cornered people making increasingly bad decisions. They needed that car, I said slowly, understanding dawning. Trevor needs money to pay off his debts, and they figured selling it was easier than explaining where all our savings went. That's exactly what Tom thinks. And here's the thing, Jessica, that car is titled solely in your me. If Trevor sold it without your permission, that's not a civil matter. That's criminal. Auto theft. Dad's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and stood up. That's my lawyer. She's downstairs. We're going to your house this morning, and we're settling this. Dad, I don't know if I do know. He came around the table and crouched beside my chair, taking my hands. Sweetheart, I let you marry him because you were an adult and it was your choice. I didn't say anything when I noticed him being controlling because I thought maybe I was being overprotective, but I won't stand by and watch you be threatened and stolen from. Not anymore. Tears burned my eyes. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid. You're kind. And you wanted to believe the best in people. That's not a character flaw, Jessica. That's who you are and it's beautiful. But kindness doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. 2 hours later, I was standing on my own front porch with my father, his lawyer, a Sharpied woman named Patricia Chen, and a police officer named Martinez, who Dad apparently went to high school with. This is just a civil standby, Officer Martinez explained to me quietly. I'm here to make sure nothing gets out of hand while you collect your belongings and have this conversation. I can't get involved in the domestic dispute itself unless someone breaks the law. Dad knocked loud authoritative. After a moment, Trevor opened the door. His eyes widened when he saw the group assembled on his porch, then narrowed with anger when they landed on me. What is this? He demanded. This is a conversation, Dad said calmly. Are we doing it out here or can we come inside? Trevor looked like he wanted to slam the door, but the presence of a police officer seemed to change his mind. He stepped back and we entered. I could hear voices from the kitchen. Amber and Nicole were already here. Of course, they were. The sisters appeared in the doorway, their faces shifting from confusion to alarm when they saw our group. What's going on? Amber demanded, but her voice had lost some of its usual confidence. Dad set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it, pulling out the documents Tom had compiled. He laid them out one by one like cards in a poker game. Trevor Hayes, $83,000 in gambling debts, online poker, sports betting, casino visits charged to credit cards. He looked at Trevor, whose face had gone pale. Want to tell Jessica about that or should I continue? This is a private matter, Trevor said, but his voice shook. It stopped being private when you tried to steal and sell your wife's car to cover your debts. Dad pulled out the bill of sale I'd found. This vehicle is titled solely in Jessica's name. Selling it without her permission isn't a family disagreement. It's auto theft, a felony. Patricia Chen stepped forward, pulling out her own documents. Mr. Hayes, I'm Patricia Chen representing Mrs. Hayes. We're prepared to file for legal separation immediately. We also have grounds for fraud charges given your systematic depletion of joint marital assets without disclosure. You can't prove that, Trevor said, but he was sweating now. Actually, we can. Dad pulled out bank statements highlighted in yellow. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every credit card payment to online gambling sites. It's all here. Amber found her voice. This is harassment. You can't just barge in here with threats. And Hayes. Patricia Chen turned to her with a cold smile. Perhaps you'd like to discuss the complaints filed against you with the Real Estate Commission. Or we could talk about inflated appraisals on the Morrison property, the lakeside condo deal. Amber's face went white. And Nicole Hayes, Patricia continued, should we discuss why you left your previous employment at Bright Smile Dental? The insurance fraud investigation they chose not to pursue in exchange for your quiet resignation. Nicole looked like she might be sick. The room fell silent. I watched Trevor's face cycle through emotions. Anger, fear, desperation. Finally, he looked at me. Jess, come on. We can work this out. You don't need to do this. Where are my car keys? I asked quietly. Baby, let's just talk about this. Family counseling or something. We can fix this. The keys, Trevor. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact second he realized I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Not ever again. He pulled the keys from his pocket and threw them on the coffee table. They landed with a metallic clatter that sounded like the ending of something. Dad picked them up and handed them to me. The weight of them in my palm felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. Here's what's going to happen, Patricia Chen said, her voice crisp and professional. Mrs. Hayes is filing for legal separation today. Given the financial deception and the attempted theft, we're asking for full custody of the minor children, child support, and division of actual marital assets, meaning assets that existed before Mr. Hayes gambled them away. If you contest any of this, Dad added, his voice quiet but still underneath, we file criminal charges for attempted auto theft. We also make sure the relevant professional boards know about Amber's real estate violations and Nicole's insurance fraud. Your choice. Trevor looked at his sisters. Amber was staring at the floor, all her swagger gone. Nicole's hands were shaking. You can't do this, Trevor said, but there was no strength behind it anymore. Those are my kids. Those are children who watched their father threaten their mother, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Children who saw their mother struggling on the subway with groceries because you and your sisters decided my car was yours to take. Children who deserve better than learning that bullying and stealing are okay if you call it family. Trevor's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him all at once, and I realized he'd only ever been strong when he had backup, when he could corner someone weaker. Faced with actual consequences, he had nothing. Mr. Pays, Patricia Chen prompted. Do we have an agreement or do we proceed with criminal charges? Fine, he said finally. The word barely a whisper. Fine, just make it go away. The debt. Dad's laugh was harsh. That's your problem, son. But you'll leave Jessica and my grandchildren alone while you figure it out. Officer Martinez, who'd been standing silently by the door, finally spoke. Mr. Pays, I'm going to strongly suggest you cooperate with these proceedings. Speaking as someone who's seen domestic situations escalate, you don't want this to get worse. Trevor just nodded defeated. We left 20 minutes later after I'd quickly gathered more clothes and important items. As I walked out carrying a box of the kids' toys, I passed Trevor sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. Part of me, the part that had loved him, that had believed in our future together, felt sad. But a bigger part felt free. Dad loaded everything into my SUV. My SUV with my keys that I'd reclaimed. What happens now? I asked. Now we get your life back on track. He smiled. But first, let's go pick up those grandkids of mine. I promised Lily she could see the crane truck. I hugged him tight right there in the driveway and whispered, "Thank you always, sweetheart." He said, "Always." 3 months later, I was buckling Owen into his car seat in my car, the one I drove every day now, when Lily asked, "Mommy, are we having dinner at Grandpa's again?" "We are," I confirmed, kissing her forehead. "Is that okay?" "It's the best," she said seriously. "Grandpa makes the best spaghetti." I laughed and climbed into the driver's seat. The divorce had been finalized last week. Trevor's parents, horrified by what their son had done, and embarrassed by their daughter's involvement, had quietly settled everything in my favor to avoid criminal charges and public scandal. I had the car, full custody, child support from Trevor's actual income, and half of what remained of our marital assets. More importantly, I had my dignity back. I'd started therapy. I'd reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from. I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space or having needs. And every week, we had dinner at Dad's house because family wasn't about obligation or control. It was about showing up for each other. As I drove through the city toward Dad's house, the evening sun painting everything gold, Lily started singing in the back seat. Owen joined in with his toddler babble, and I realized something. That awful day on the subway when Dad had found us at our lowest point hadn't been the worst moment of my life. It had been the beginning of getting my life back. I pulled up to Dad's house and he was already on the porch waving. Lily unbuckled herself and ran to him, chattering about her day at school. Owen toddled after her, arms outstretched for his grandfather. Dad caught my eye over the kids' heads and smiled. I smiled back, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in years. Sometimes you need someone to see you at your worst to find the strength to become your best. And sometimes the person who gave you your first ride in life is the same person who helps you reclaim the driver's seat when you've lost your way. I was driving my own life now and I was never giving anyone else the keys.